As a patriot and someone who believes in progressive patriotism, I'm really proud that loving your country and loving your neighbour recognises that so many Black and Asian communities in this country right now are terrified. Now, they're not necessarily even migrant communities. They might have been people who have lived here for generations, but they are still terrified because the whole frame of the migration crisis is a racist, fascist frame. And the Green Party are the party that will tell the truth on that. Now, are the people shouting it racist or fascist? Absolutely not. Lots of them are very concerned that they can't get an NHS appointment, that they can't get a council house, that there's a sense the country is broken. And you know what? They're right. So the answer is not to blame the migrants. The answer is not to point at the small boats. The answer is to point at the private jets, the private yachts, and to multimillionaires and billionaires and say, we will fund our public services, we will build council houses, we will invest in our NHS.
What is your Green Party going to look like compared with what we've seen in the past?
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for your congratulations. Inequality is at the heart of all of the problems in this country. People are working longer and longer hours, but they're not getting paid more. They are tired and they are exhausted. People are worried about putting food on the table, heat in their homes, how they're going to get to work, if they even have a job. So when I talk about eco-populism, what I'm really saying is this is about the 99% of us, working class communities, people who run small businesses, self-employed people, people who are out of work, people who are disabled. We have so much more in common than the 1% being corporations that are destroying our environment, destroying our democracy, and destroying our communities. The Green Party that I'm now leading and has been doing will be out there to speak for the most marginalised voices, those people who really need us to amplify their voices, because actually tackling inequality improves everyone's lives. What I would say is that Nigel Farage was the leading cause of Brexit, one of the biggest disasters, I believe, for this country. And that man still has the audacity on the national stage to suggest that he wants to remove himself from other organisations. I believe ultimately our heart is in the European Union, and I think there's a way of building connections and peace and diplomacy that accepts the special relationship with Donald Trump, but America more widely has lots of questions for lots of people in this country. When Nigel Farage stands on a platform and says, these people are your problems, your lives are really difficult right now and they're to blame, I can totally understand why people get caught up in that. I'm not blaming them for that. I'm blaming Nigel Farage, not the people who go along with that. We need bolder stories. We need to be based in facts and information rather than his misinformation and lies. We need to be based in unity rather than his division, and actually make sure that it's not enough to have the spreadsheets and the graphs of statistics. I could tell you, for instance, there's a stat that if you use the National Health Service, the person who treats or cares for you is so much more likely to be a migrant than anyone in front of you in the queue. I've been saying that for about 5-6 years, and I know no one's listening. The only way that I'm really going to get that through is to tell a story about it, to have a narrative, whether it's a social media video, whether it's a message or a story. And so what I really want to see the Green Party stepping up and doing is telling those stories. And that's not just me being the storyteller, but actually the people with the lived experience all around the country. There's amazing stories happening in the north of Wales of people doing extraordinary things. Let's hear those stories rather than the charlatans.
So are you going to be the left answer to Nigel Farage?
For sure. I reject Nigel Farage's politics and everything he stands for. I think it's also undoubtedly true. We need communicators on the left. I guess the one difference I would have is Nigel Farage is a one-man show. If I'm a one-man show, I've absolutely failed as the leader of the Green Party. I want to raise, amplify and lift up the voices of other people. There's far too many people in this party, but more importantly in the country, that we don't hear from. I see my job as to, yes, tell stories, but to use my platform to facilitate and amplify the stories that are happening around the country.
You want to spend more. My
Absolutely.
question is, you've got to keep the financial markets on side. They are nervy, they are jumpy, and you might frighten them to death.
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is absolutely destroy this myth that a national economy is anything like a household budget. So actually, this idea that we need to balance the books is actually just not true, and has come from decades of Tory and Labour politicians that have been pushing an austerity narrative. And so there's something called spending multipliers, which says that every pound that you spend on the economy in our public services actually benefits the economy, because our economy benefits from a national health service, from universal and free childcare, from public transport so people can get to their jobs properly, or even just to visit a friend.
Sure.
The working class communities I'm talking about when I talk about social justice will face the worst impacts of wildfires and floods. They're the people who are least resilient to it. And the horrible irony is they're the people who've done the least to cause it. That's both on a national level, but also internationally in the global south. We've extracted them for oil and gas. So these conversations are all part of the same conversation. The question, though, is what's the first thing we talk about? And I want to talk about lowering people's bills. And the Green Party is saying the problem is not the small boats. The problem is the private jets and the private yachts. Let's make sure that people in this country who are earning or have masses of wealth are actually redistributing a tiny bit of that wealth. Just to give you context, by the way, I'm talking about 1% on assets of £10 million or more, or 2% on assets of £1 billion or more. That would raise about £25 billion. That is a huge amount of money compared to the tiny amount that migration costs this country. In fact, it's arguably a net benefit.
White van man would have an awful lot to pick up with you on this. They would disagree with you.
And I'd want to have that conversation, that disagreement, because, you know, they'd partly be right. And this is exactly what it comes to what I'm talking about. They're not the enemy, and people driving around are not the enemy. And again, as I've said, if you do not have an alternative, what do you expect people to do? I can understand why people drive in rural communities. I'm fortunate enough to live in the centre of London. I can cycle around. Public transport is amazing. That's not most people's experience in this country, and I really mean most people. So then the question is, what are you going to do about it? And I think the thing is to make sure that the money is going to give people cheaper and better alternatives. Now that's with transport, but you can take this across any measure whatsoever. Any option where you want people to do the right thing for the planet and the right thing for the community, let's subsidise good behaviour rather than subsidising fossil fuel companies and oil and gas. And it's no coincidence that this Labour government took £4.1 million from Quadrature Capital. They're a hedge fund that have assets in oil and gas, arms trade and gambling companies. I think it points to why Keir Starmer and the Labour government are making so many terrible decisions. They're doing what they've been paid to by their vested interests. I have two vested interests: people and the planet. Labour were absolutely so determined and so ready to bring the Green Party down, way and above than they've ever competed with any other political party. I don't want to create that relationship with parties on the left. If Labour have chosen to do that, and in fact, I've not seen it myself, but I've heard Labour have come quite hard for me today, I think it shows the pettiness of the fact I'm talking about inequality and talking about the fact lifting up working class voices. You would think a Labour Prime Minister or Sadiq Khan, who I work with regularly, you know, I do challenge him, but also there's moments of cooperation there, would go, actually, I welcome the fact that there's a new left-wing progressive voice in British politics. For whatever reason, here's why you should vote Labour and not Green. But they've not made that argument. They have completely, in the most petty tactics possibly, gone for me. And I think what that says is they are terrified. And I couldn't be more pleased, because right now they are more scared of losing votes and seats to the Reform Party than to the Green Party. What does success look like? In the next few months, I want Keir Starmer to be more worried about the Green Party than Reform. Absolutely convinced we can do it by growing our membership.